We have another twist in the Nolan Wells death mystery we want to talk about. His friends, who have come under a cloud of suspicion and rumors and are lawyering up, possibly about to take legal action, they have visited the barrier island near where Nolan's body washed ashore. Why? What does this mean for the investigation? What does this mean for the search for the truth? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. We have an update on the Nolan Wells case that we want to talk about. Friends of this deceased 18-year-old college football player reportedly visited Horn Island at the end of last week, on Friday. Remember, Nolan's body washed ashore near this barrier island on July 6th after a boating trip over the July 4th weekend with his friends. And this is key. According to TMZ, the young men here, Warren Hudson and Jax Pitalo, took their lawyers, J. Tyler Cox and Edward Andrew Paltzik, to investigate. It seems they may be conducting their own independent investigation after they retain counsel. And this is all in light of reported threats they may have been receiving. There has been online speculation that they were somehow involved in what happened to Nolan. To be clear, there is nothing that we have seen publicly released by authorities to verify that in any way. They deny any allegations. And by the way, the attorneys also represent another one of Nolan's purported friends, Morgan Seymour, too. And the investigation by the Jackson County Sheriff's Office is still reportedly underway. And even though sources reportedly say that the official autopsy has been completed, those results haven't been released. It's reported that this case will be presented to a grand jury for potential criminal charges, which is our understanding to be procedure under Mississippi law. But after that grand jury is when we may see the results of this autopsy and the toxicology report. But look, the bottom line is we don't even know if a crime has been committed or allegedly committed in connection with Nolan's death or the investigation in any way. There have been no criminal charges. There have been no arrests. There have been 3 arrests in connection with those allegedly making threats. We've talked about that before. That's something else. But here's where it gets really interesting regarding this trip back to the island. So according to TMZ, Attorney Cox said things got very emotional when these guys went back to Horn Island. Cox reportedly said the trip was tough for Warren and Jax because that's the last place they saw their best friend. A couple of times we had to pause and give them their space. He emphasized that Nolan was like a brother to them, that Nolan loved them, that they haven't even had an opportunity to properly grieve. Cox said that they wanted to show Attorney Paltzik what's referred to as the washing machine. This is reportedly a part of the island where the tides create this kind of whirlpool effect. Paltzik reportedly confirmed those were the same conditions as when Nolan disappeared and was later found dead. And this is namely, in his opinion, murky water, non-swimmable conditions. To be clear, we don't know if that had a factor in Nolan's death. And not only do we not know the results of the official autopsy, but the independent autopsy, right? The one that was commissioned by Nolan's family, who are conducting their own independent investigation through their attorney, Ben Crump, listed the cause and manner of death as undetermined. Now, that's partially, it seems to be, because Nolan's body, the one that was received by this private pathologist, it was missing components of the throat, seemingly because the state ME, right, was conducting further testing. But if you recall, the narrative that we've heard is that the last time the friends saw Nolan was when he left their boat to stay on Horn Island, allegedly to talk to a young woman. According to a Department of Marine Resources report, friends who were with Nolan said, quote, when they left, he was in the company of an unknown female and that he chose to remain on the island. However, Nolan's family said this doesn't make sense, that Nolan wouldn't go out on his own. Even one of Wells' friends, Javon Williams, told CNN, I've never known Nolan to stay back while his friends leave. He's always been a guy where if he rode with you, he's going to come back with you. That's always how he's been every single time. In a statement to People on August 9th, attorneys Paltzik and Cox said in part that their 3 clients, quote, are completely innocent young men. Each of them love Nolan Wells as a brother, and each are haunted to the cores of their souls by Nolan's tragic death. Magnifying the tragedy, hordes of hustlers, opportunists, and vultures have descended upon the beautiful community of Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Their aim is to divide a town, fuel political agendas, and profit from this tragedy. We, on the other hand, only deal in evidence, facts, and reality. We will never defame, guess, or speculate. And here is the truth. We don't know how Nolan Wells died. But what we do know, beyond any doubt, is this. Warren,
A Jackson County deputy told the press no foul play was suspected. That was July 6th. By July 21st, Nancy Grace had convened a 1-hour special. A grand jury was reportedly empaneled, and the Department of Justice was fielding calls. That is a shift in momentum that does not happen by accident. It happens when someone with a national platform decides a case is not going to disappear. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Project Cold Case. Because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. The initial official narrative was straightforward: a tragic 4th of July drowning. Nolan Wells, 18 years old, rowed out to Horn Island on a boat called the Triton. The boat had bilge pump trouble. His friends say they left without him because he wanted to stay behind and talk to a girl named Katie. He was found dead 2 days later. The sheriff said no crime was committed. Case closed. Except it was never closed. And the reason it is not closed is because the evidence does not align with a simple drowning. The independent autopsy commissioned by the family could not determine cause or manner of death, a finding that effectively contradicted the local coroner's preliminary assessment. The state autopsy has been completed but will be withheld until a grand jury reviews it. A grand jury that is now convening. That sequence is itself an admission that the initial dismissal was premature at best. That is a direct contradiction. One party says he chose to stay. The other says he intended to leave. Both cannot be true. Here is where the forensic fury comes in. The timeline is the battlefield. That's not an investigation. That's an assumption dressed up as a conclusion. We keep coming back to the same question. Every investigation starts somewhere. But where did this one actually begin? Because it appears to have begun with a declaration of innocence rather than a pursuit of facts. GPS data reportedly shows the Triton departed at 4:03 p.m. Witnesses on social media said Nolan was still on the island at 40:50 p.m. A separate witness reported he was nowhere to be seen by 7:30 p.m.
Match up their initial story that they told you with what the area looks like. I would imagine that, right? To see, if there's any kind of inconsistencies.
Sure, absolutely. And listen, you hit it. You've got to test the statements, right? Witnesses can, because I can assure you that these kids weren't the only people they spoke to. I'm sure everybody that they had the opportunity that was on that island, they're going to speak to. And so whether you're an attorney or whether you're in law enforcement, you've got to match the statements. You've got to test the statements. I've said this 1,000 times in my career, especially when I'm teaching. Witnesses can be wrong, right? Not because out of malice or not because they're doing anything nefarious or they're trying to hide anything, but memory is flawed. And so I would like to go back and take a look at everything, and I would like to test the statements of all of the witnesses involved, including the young men that were involved.
It's interesting. I'm looking at this statement from Sun Herald. Attorney Cox had said regarding Attorney Peltzik, Andrew Peltzik, now that Edward is on board, he needs to lay eyes on the island himself, not to gather evidence, as there's no evidence to gather on Horn Island, but to understand the layout and dynamics of the island. And one of the things that I had mentioned earlier is there was this conversation about a whirlpool effect. So they talked about the conditions matching or potentially matching what the conditions were like the weekend that Nolan disappeared. The whirlpool effect of the water creating these tides, and that it creates murky water, unswimmable conditions. It seems to suggest that perhaps what happened to Nolan was a tragic accident, that if he went into the water, even though it's been said he's incredibly athletic and a good swimmer, could there be a condition that the water was in that you go in there and there's no way to get out safely?
Sure, it is not beyond the realm of possibilities. I mean, that absolutely could have happened. And from someone who has no idea, I wasn't there. I haven't looked at all of the evidence yet. I'm sure that, some evidence has been released to the public, but not everything has been released to the public. That was one of my initial thought processes. Any investigation that you work, even if you think your guys are guilty, you always have to kind of red team it. You always have to ask yourself, okay, yeah, I know what this looks like, but we've got to be fair to everybody, suspects included. I know what this looks like. It looks nefarious. And I'm not saying specifically in this case, but in general, I know it looks nefarious, but at the end of the day, what are the other possibilities? Because we never want to convict an innocent person. And likewise, we don't want the victim of a crime, their crime, to go unsolved. So you have to look at it. If you're going to do a responsible investigation, you have to look at it from all sides. And what you just said, Jesse, is so possible. It's very plausible. So I can see why they would want to go back and talk about that whirlpool effect.
how does this affect the investigation? And you said investigation. There are now 3, right? So there's the official investigation by the sheriff's office. There is the independent investigation being commissioned by the family.
There is a gap of nearly 3 hours where the official narrative relies entirely on the word of a group of friends whose accounts have already proven inconsistent on key details. Now, let's talk about Katie. The friends told Nolan's mother that he stayed with a girl named Katie. At first, they claimed they didn't know her, had never seen her before. Then it emerged they had been texting with her. Her sister gave a different account, telling the Daily Mail that Katie believed Nolan was getting ready to board the boat with his friends, and that the friends wouldn't have left without him. The United Cajun Navy compiled a 22-page working report. They are not investigators, but their document lists the evidence they suggest law enforcement should request: phone records, GPS data, witness interviews conducted separately. They are asking the questions that should have been asked on day 1. And the suggestion to request specific evidence implies that the investigation is not pursuing those avenues aggressively enough on its own. There is an audio recording of the Triton contacting a towing service. The call was canceled. A Good Samaritan towed the boat in. That Good Samaritan is now receiving threats online. That is the environment this case has created. An environment of intimidation, of witnesses being harassed, of public figures receiving death threats. A California man was arrested for making threats against a judge who is the stepmother of one of Nolan's friends. That is not just a distraction. That is a systemic failure of justice. Every investigation starts somewhere, but this one started with a refusal to look anywhere that mattered. The family is not satisfied. The public is not satisfied. The grand jury is now the mechanism through which the truth must be forced. The central question remains what happened between 4:30 p.m. when the Triton left and 7:30 p.m. when Nolan Wells was last seen. And why are the people who claim to have been there so unable to provide a consistent answer? We are going to leave you with a specific document. The United Cajun Navy report is publicly available. They released it through their official channels on August 4th. Read it. Compare the timeline they compiled to the statements made by the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. And ask yourself one question: if the investigation was thorough, why does a volunteer organization's report provide more detail than any official update from the Department of Justice? Like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications for Project Cold Case. The truth is in the documents. We're going to find it.
There's a ton of spotlight. I've said this before. One thing for Ben Crump, I mean, he has brought a spotlight to this, put pressure on law enforcement to do this the right way, for the DA's office to do this the right way. And look, we're waiting right now. I don't know the status of the sheriff's office investigation. I don't know when it's going to be presented to a grand jury. We're kind of in a waiting period here. And I imagine that's a very, very difficult and tense position for law enforcement to have all this attention on them in this way. Is it not?
It is. And the one thing I would, it looks like they're doing things the right way. I always caution when I teach, I always caution my guys, never let the media, never let your administration, never let anybody rush your investigation. Our job is to do a complete and thorough investigation. And this high profile case, I could see where it would cause, it could, if the right investigators and the right administration at that police agency, if they're not doing the right thing. But it seems to me, and again, I've never spoken with anybody down there, so I don't know, but what I'm looking at, it seems they are doing the right thing. They're taking their time. They're not falling to political pressure. They're not falling to the media pressure. And I think that's very, very important. As long as we know as investigators, hey, listen, we're not going to follow these outside influences. We're going to do a complete and thorough investigation. And sure, it's frustrating, but this is our job and this is what we have to do.
And no matter which camp, whichever side you're looking at here in terms of law enforcement or this independent investigation, everybody's trying to find the truth of what happened to Nolan. And look, again, it doesn't discount. The family wants answers. They want their own team. They want to verify whatever the results are of the state investigation, and they have every right to do that. And hopefully this family is going to get the answers one way or another that they deserve. We don't know how long this is going to take, but we're going to stay on top of it. John Rappa, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. See you next time, everybody.